Hi, everybody. I am Dana Lauer from Project Arc, and it has been a while. We took the summer off to let everyone relax and rejuvenate and kind of disassociate from the work world. And we are back again with a new school year with DisEd. So, to give you a little bit of an introduction, because maybe some of you haven't seen DisEd before, um, I am Dana, as I said, and you may know me from my work in pushing that space in project-based learning to that more authentic side, so that our learners have that opportunity to really affect real-world change in their communities and beyond. And in fact, the ARC in Project ARC stands for authenticity, relevancy, and community connected learning. So for the past 20 years, this has really been my passion in terms of education, and the journey is usually pretty rewarding, but it does get bumpy at times. And it was last November, so almost a full year ago, I put out this call on LinkedIn to connect with me if you considered yourself to be a disagreeable person in the space of education. I didn't care if you were in the classroom. I didn't care if you were in ed tech. I didn't care if you were just a parent. But this post was actually prompted by a quote from Adam Grant's New York Times bestseller, Think Again, The Power of Knowing What You Don't Know. So I'm going to take a moment and I'm going to read the quote that inspired my LinkedIn post. Says the ideal members of a challenge network are disagreeable because they're fearless about questioning the way things have always been done and holding us accountable for thinking again. There's evidence that disagreeable people speak more frequently, especially when leaders aren't receptive, and foster more task conflict. They give the critical feedback that we might not want to hear, but need to hear. So again, that just, it blew my mind when I read that. And I said to Tim, we need to do something. And all of these individuals started replying to me on LinkedIn, and DisEd was born. So our guests today and in any future podcasts may disagree with us at Project ARC, and it doesn't necessarily constitute an endorsement from Project ARC in any way, shape, or form. But instead, Tim and I really want to learn and grow as we think again. And so this is always the favorite part of my month. I've missed it for the past 2 months, and I'm really excited to have Lisa and Shane with us today to hear a little bit about what they're disagreeing in terms of education and where we are currently.
All right, thank you, Dana. And I am the Tim, the other half of Project ARC that Dana has mentioned, career educator and education policy and politics person. It's really a great honor for me to get to introduce our two guests tonight. I'm going to start with Lisa Glenn Nobles and then go to Shane Krakowski, both of whom we've known from way back in the early days when you could meet people on Twitter and not be worried they were stalkers. So Lisa, I'm going to kick it over to you. Start us off and tell us, what is your dis word that you would use when thinking about education today?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, I'm so glad to be the first person that came to Tim's mind this year around disagreeability. That's quite an honor. My dis word is disingenuous. So I feel pretty strongly recently that a number of the directions that we're going with education, the products that we're trying to push into the classroom, particularly in the ed tech space, which I come from, so no shade there, but particularly in the ed tech space, are really a marketplace play and not a play to truly educate our youth better. I think a lot of the policy measures that we are pushing forward are measures that are disingenuous, that are designed to look really good, but not truly designed to make impact. So I'll be happy to share more about that as we go forward.
Well, thank you, Lisa. That's a good word to start with. Shane, how about you?
Well, I've got a few around a couple themes. I feel like where I went first was discourse. So because this is a discourse, but also the idea of anti-courses. I feel like the focus on courses in both learning or schooling as well as accounting for learning distracts us from more whole person wayfinding as well as more experiential uh, models. And so even though the word discourse, the way I'm using it, isn't exactly the way it's used, that's what came to mind first. I think the other word I would put out there would be, dispel. I think the some of the ways that people are used to schooling and some of the ways that are propped up in pop culture, i.e., shows like Community, don't do enough to dispel that it doesn't have to be that way. And some of those pop culture things, as funny as they might be, only reinforce these bad models and bad kind of culture around what school and learning needs to be. So discourse, dispel, and probably lastly, disaggregate. I think the more we can disaggregate um, and, uh, and look at things in more nuanced ways, the better.
Oh, that's a lot to think about, Shane. You gave us three. Lisa, is there an extra backup word you'd like
Oh,
to think about?
so my runner up tonight was distracted. I find that a lot of the solutions that I see recently, and this is in the um, K-12 space, the higher ed space, and the adult learning space, which I get to be in
Hmm.
more routinely, um, are really distracted in regards to what the true purpose needs to be, right? And so it's like, how can we get AI into everything we're doing? Like,
Hmm.
that's awesome. Again, no shade on AI in the classroom. I think it is going to be a necessary tool. It isn't the solution. It's just a tool. Um, and it can become a huge distraction from what the core purpose really is. So that was my runner up for tonight.
Okay. And distraction is certainly a big word in education spaces right now for a lot of different reasons, right? We're hearing and reading a lot of attacks on why are teens so distracted. I
Mhm.
think that connects a little bit with what Shane was talking about needing to dispel the focus that courses are only about loading kids with information. And we went through some of this. I'll go this way with it. We went through some of this with the student agency conversation maybe a decade ago, where there was a lot of focus on student agency. Um, and it seemed to me that the discourse on student agency was all about, like, wouldn't it be great if kids would do what I asked? If they would take ownership of the things that I asked rather than actual student agency. Um, why do we have those kinds of um, disingenuous conversations around things like student agency, around choice, et cetera, where the system always seems to take it back and say, well, this new idea is really about getting kids to do their homework or getting kids to pass their tests. What do you think's up there? Either one of you can jump in, and you too, Dana, if you want.
I'll certainly jump in. I think in the work that I do now, it's very systems focused, right? And
Mhm.
so a lot of what we think about is the system and how the system compels us forward, right? So when I build a project management system, I'm thinking through what are the actions that I can encourage or discourage, just in the way this is constructed, right?
Mhm.
I think a big reason that we do have that distraction and that disingenuous approach is we are designed as a system, and systems protect themselves, right? And so we are designed in
Mhm.
a way that we want to protect what has already existed. And so when, student agency is an example, I worked for a little while with a startup that was doing some micro schools and
Mhm.
project-based learning, but as a very small in-home school space. I saw some of the most engaged students I've ever seen there. And that was terrifying to every teacher I talked to because they did
Hmm.
not have trained teachers. They had basically parent moderators.
Mhm.
So I think a lot of those pieces come because we are a system and we try to protect the system and try instead of trying to protect the outcome. If we have to fundamentally change the system, that's fine to me. That sounds great.
Mhm.
Um, and so, I think a lot of it comes from that.
I really am glad that you shifted to that outcome system because obviously outcomes have been a big part of education for the last 20 years or so. And I know I'm going to get Dana to talk on this one,
Cool.
right? We have talked about outcomes to the point that most states now have, hundreds of pages of outcomes that people are expected to do. And as a result, a lot of school districts have moved to portraits of a graduate or graduate profiles that try to lump all that stuff into 4 or 5 things that they can focus on as an outcome. But I'm curious, like we've had lots of disaggregated outcomes that don't make any sense to anybody when you look at all the standards documents, right? Then we've had these like clustered power standards or graduate profiles that are trying to reduce it all down to a few things. What are the outcomes that we're looking for? And I encourage everybody to be really disagreeable here, right? Push back on the system, push back on our sense of what it means to be an educated adult. What are the outcomes?
So I'm gonna answer and throw out another dis word, and it's not a dis word that ever really have has come to my mind in the last almost year of doing this. I'm gonna say distance. I am about to be an empty nester after this year, as my youngest is a senior in high school, and she is an excellent student. She's in the gifted program. And I think back to when she was identified in kindergarten and the systems that were in place to support her, and how over the last 12 years of that system, she's done very, very well because she's a good kid and wants really good grades. She is your quintessential portrait of a graduate that every school wants. But if I look at the other 275 kids in her class, not many of them are. And so that distance from kindergarten to graduation, what have we done during that time period? When they're 5-year olds and you think that graduation is so far away, what have we done in the current systems with the 100s of the standards and the outcomes that we have in place? What have we done to really prepare our students to be individuals that, kind of dispel the notion of what a good student is, or to engage in discourse, and to really focus on outcomes and preparing them for the real world? And Shane, I know you've got kiddos that, or at least one that's right around the same age as Lydia. So
Yeah, well, that made me go to what's disingenuous, I think, is how so much of school is looked at as the academic portion of it, and so much of it really that's just the secondary part. So a lot of the attention goes to the content and that acquisition and all that. And I feel like so if my daughter we live in the city of Milwaukee, go to Milwaukee Public School, it's you've got to kind of filter in there. So again, it feels a little disingenuous because a lot of people talking about education reform still send their kids to well-resourced places where you don't have to kind of make the same decisions that maybe other people have to make. So that's disingenuous, I think,
Hmm.
um, to the cause. And I think what I've really come to learn is a lot of what the high school experience is differs for different students. That could be getting engaged in sports, that could be, finding a job that kind of makes you realize, oh, I want to be a nurse or whatever. And so I think that's where, for me, the disingenuousness comes from, is this idea that it's all about the academics. And I think it's about so many other, and living in the city, and and seeing different and working with a number of different charter schools, and like seeing there's a group called Vela.com. It's basically they're supporting micro schools all over the place,
Hmm.
and it's having gone to their conference a month ago or so. It was just what an interesting mixed group of people, and a lot of what those people are focusing on isn't exactly they want the best for their kid, but they also recognize that that might not mean that they're going to do pre-calculus, and they're okay with that. So to me, that feels more genuine. You
Hmm.
know, that's like you were alluding to, Lisa. Some of that feels well intentioned, but also uninformed. And but anyway, that's where combining just experience from working with different kinds of schools, both independent, charter, and then seeing how this choice movement's kind of happening more and more. And then, like you said, Dana, connecting with my own daughters in their journey in a public school system, when a lot of our friends just moved out to the suburbs, and that was the easier choice, even though they're not
Hmm.
really picking a better model, in my opinion. They're just getting away from less advantaged people. But yeah, there we go. I don't know. That was an attempt to talk about disingenuous in education.
Well, and I think also starting to broach this question of outcomes, and I think it's interesting, like Shane and Lisa, you're both people who are now outside the system, right? And the system always talks about, as Dana used the phrase, preparing graduates for the world of work or college and career, that kind of stuff. Um, and we hear supposedly from a lot of experts about what that world needs, right? I'm curious, as you think about outcomes, whether it's for your own kids or for kids in any school community, whether public, private, charter, parochial, inner city, suburban, right? What might an outcome be, Lisa, that you'd be glad to see that was disagreeable to the system, perhaps?
The number one outcome that I would love to see that I think is incredibly disagreeable to this. Actually, I'm going to give you two because I'm disagreeable. I'm going to do exactly the opposite of what you told me to.
That's all
Um,
right.
the first one is just curiosity, right? An unfailing, undying willingness to ask why.
Hmm.
And I can tell you as a teacher, those kids I loved and also dreaded to see them coming down the hallway because I was like, I am not going to know. And they are now old enough that I can't put them off. Um, but that is such a huge, huge piece. And as an employer now, looking at my team and team members who are going to go a little deeper and say, wait, hold on, why? Like, should we do it that
Hmm.
way? That curiosity is huge. And then I think the second one is discourse, right? I want people who can talk to each other and who can disagree.
Hmm.
My dad always says you can disagree without being disagreeable, which maybe is not on brand for the podcast, but um, what he means is rude, not
Hmm.
disagreeable, because he's the king of disagreeable. Um, you need to be able to have those conversations respectfully, kindly, and also with facts, to
Hmm.
Shane's point of like sometimes that I understand what you're saying, but it may be ill-informed, and so I'm going to share why it's ill-informed. I'm going to respect you as a human, and that's something that is really hard to come by. It's why you can't make buddies on Twitter anymore and go seek them out at conferences and go hang out afterwards. So yeah, I think for me, the outcomes are curiosity and discourse, the ability to have discourse.
Those are two really nice outcomes. Shane or Dana, want to plug in?
Yeah, those are great. I like, I would say with the discourse is having task ownership. I don't know if that's maybe too micro, but just something that I look for is can you kind of bite, and maybe because we're a smaller organization, and maybe another little dichotomy is I feel like if you're working for a large company, some of those needs might be different, even though they say they want the same.
Yeah.
Hmm.
I've seen that, and I've seen in trying to hire and work with people that come from large companies, it's a different skill set, so not giving any shade to it, but it's much different if you're working in a smaller team, the kinds of skills you need, and in particular in terms of task ownership. So, we when I'm working with somebody, I want to be able to contribute, but I also want them to own it to a level of fidelity and quality that they believe is good. And I feel like people, a lot of younger people nowadays are so used to the spoon-fed, rote, get an assignment, that whole rigmarole, that they can't operate if you say, yeah, you run with it.
Yeah.
Well, what do you think? And it's like, you're wasting my time. And the other part that kind of with AI that I find very funny, and this happens with adults not only, but you can tell when you get a response from somebody that's AI written, and I'm not anti that, but
Hmm.
if you're going to use AI to come up with your response or your work that you said you're going to do, at least read it to the bottom, please. Not that it needs to come off like it's your own, but often AI isn't directionally 100%. And so if I'm the one that has to do the quality control, you're not saving me any time. You're not adding to the work that we need to do. You're just adding a layer of cross check and a layer of, oh, I can't trust this person to get it over. And so, that kind of ownership to uh, that ability to own a task to a quality and fidelity is key.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it is a disagreeable concept, Shane, right? In the public education system where we do have a sense that there are right answers. And I think that transfers over to other school systems also, right? And that I think of, and Dana, maybe Lydia had to go through this. I know Sophie had to, in taking AP classes where the teacher is telling them, like, if you write your essays this way, you'll get a 3. You have to learn to write it the way it's going to be graded so that you can get a 5, right? And you have interesting ideas there, but you're going to poor grade because you're not responding inside the boxes of evaluation. Dana, thoughts from you on outcomes before we turn to a slightly different direction?
So how about self-identification? In in just in terms of uh, who am I? I mean, shouldn't education be about figuring out who you are? And
Mhm.
Love that.
really only because we're going through this right now where my kid thought she knew what she wanted to do till about 2 weeks ago. And she's like, you know what? I'm not sure. And my
Mhm.
college applications are due. And where am I applying? And what am I applying to do? Because what I thought I wanted to do, maybe I don't want to do. And shouldn't someone have helped me through this process over the last 12 years? And she's had more help than most because for
Right.
the last 3 years, so now this is the fourth year that she gets a period with her gifted teacher that is an independent study that she can kind of explore, do some self exploration. But even with that, she still isn't quite sure who she is.
That's great. I feel the same way with my senior in high school. It's like, how are we here? And then you have a little bit of, my gosh, how am I feeling as a parent that I know about these things and they have these supports and it still feels this way. That feels like something's broken.
Yeah, and Lisa, you were about to jump in before I went to Dana, so go ahead.
Well, and I think it builds perfectly here, and we're doing a poor job of disagreeing with each other, so we'll have to work on that. But also, I was thinking in regards to Shane's answers about, task fidelity as well as really being willing to seek all the way through and fully understand things. Something that I see routinely also in regards to not to knowing yourself is our current system really encourages adherence to a neurotypical
Mhm.
norm. And a big piece of the curriculum implicitly is this is how you operate in the neurotypical world, and you need to do that
Mhm.
appropriately. And we get so many kids who come out of high school saying, this is who I think I am, because they've been told their entire career that it's who they ought to be. And those kids become something very different as adults. They either go into, something that feels creative, or a trade where they can use their hands because they weren't still kids, or they sort of lose themselves for a little while and then refine themselves as, folks that work in tech. So yeah, if we are pumping out graduates who don't understand who they are, don't understand how their brains work, don't understand why they fit in or don't fit into the societal norms, it is a failure. It's a huge failure, and it's a concern that I think will only continue to grow.
I'm just curious to ask everybody here, how many of us were those quote neurotypical norm good students of the four of us that are in this call? How many of us fit that pattern?
So I did. I was probably Dana's daughter, but I was diagnosed at 40 with ADHD, and it turns out I have a raging case of ADHD.
Yeah.
But I do things like stimming under my desk with my nail that I am doing right now, right? So I looked like a very calm and quiet student, and I did all of my work very well, but that was not really who I was.
And Shane?
I was not that student. I had perhaps the wrong opinion. The opportunity cost to get an A was not worth it. The B or C got you there, to the extent that, and it's funny to look back on this. I went on a homework strike. I think it was my sophomore or junior year because I was a single parent and I was working 20 plus hours. I don't think it was legal in a restaurant not to be named, and and then school and whatever. And I could listen to history and get it, grok it, and do well on the exams. And this Mr. Gatewood, rest in peace, would give this homework assignment that was busy work, and it was just too. It was like hours, and I said, look, it, I will make you a deal. I guarantee I will get good A's on all the exams. And but I'm not doing these worksheets. It's too much work. It's not worth it. And he
Mhm.
goes, well, that'll be great, but the average grade is half of your grade is homework. And I said, well, let's figure out some other way to check in because it just no,
Yeah.
no. So I thought, well, the proof's in the pudding once he sees me do good on these exams. So I go through a full semester. I used to come around every day and check, and it became a little running joke and didn't bother me.
Hmm.
Um, and well, it's the last day he comes and he gives us our, you got an A on all, I think it was five or four or five or six exams. And I go, like, yeah. And he goes, and you got an F on your homework. And I'm like, I'm waiting for this like reveal of, well, since you did that. And he even told me early in the semester, well, I do this for other people. I said, perfect. I don't care. I'm not like jaded that you're doing
Hmm.
it different for other people. Do whatever. What do I care how you're doing with them? It's just measuring what I know, isn't it? Why do you care
Hmm.
what about? And so anyway, he gave me a C, and I went on to undergrad and took a couple history courses, and just happened to be lucky enough to have that kind of thing, and did very well and undergrad history related courses. But that was a pivotal moment because I remember feeling like this is unfair. I'm learning the information. I'm accommodating my lifestyle or my situation. And I remember thinking, not going to name the name, but I went on to be the valedictorian in the class. That person, she couldn't talk about history outside of a fact, but she was
Hmm.
going to get an A. That felt wrong to me because I felt like she couldn't find her way out of a paper bag, but she was compliant. So anyway,
No, I mean, I asked that question not so much because I wanted all of us to out our academic backgrounds. And I was kind of a 7-10 split on that one. I was like the perfect kid if words were involved and like struggled like crazy if anything that involved numbers, right? Uh, and I don't know, Lisa, I sometimes look back and wonder if I was never dyslexic, I don't think, but with numbers, I always tended to see numbers backwards, right? Like not with words, but with numbers. Um, but the point is, when Dana read the Adam Grant quote at the beginning and talked about the ideal members of a challenge network, and this is maybe a way for us to start to wrap up, right? Um, I wonder if a big issue with the system and a big part of what it means to admit disagreeableness into our system is to acknowledge that in many cases, and Lisa, you mentioned this, our students are in fact part of our challenge network, right? It's our students who approach us and are disagreeable about this or about that. Um, to Dana's point, my daughter Sophie once had a teacher who's a gifted teacher who said to her, you know, like, you're getting 99s on tests, so your gifted plan this year is to get hundreds, right? Because that's the only way you can improve is to get 100. And she's like, why the hell does it matter? Right. So how do we think about that? Is like, if we're really going to encourage disagreeability in the education system, how can we incorporate the disagreeableness that we get from our students? And I'll let each of you sort of have a thought on that as we start to wrap things up.
Well, I go back to have them design more of their learning.
Okay.
That might mean this is where I'll be disagreeable with maybe a couple of it. This means giving up rigor in places where we want rigor, and means giving up, coverage.
Bold statements, but certainly disagreeable. Lisa?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is as adults, we aren't often willing to sit with our own discomfort with the system, and we're willing
Mhm.
to say, like, it's okay because this is just the way it is, and you'll learn. And, when you get older, it's going to be really helpful to have worked in a group project. And we defend. And I think we have to pull down some of our own defenses. Shane's teacher example is a great one. He had the opportunity to bring Shane into his challenge network, but that would have taken a lot of work. And it would have
Yeah.
meant reworking how he ran his classroom, and it would have meant reworking how he communicated. And that's hard. And so,
Mhm.
I think a lot of times it's the willingness to sit with it and to say, wow, this really isn't working, even if it is best practice or it's what we've always done. And we may have to make some really fundamental changes.
So I like that the word discomfort cropped up in those remarks, right? And the idea
Absolutely.
of having to sit with it. Dana, any
Mhm.
thoughts from you about how we include students as part of our challenge network?
Yeah, and this kind of goes back to, Lisa, I think you said earlier about not necessarily knowing what the answer was and being very uncomfortable with it as a teacher. And
Yeah.
y- starting from the perspective that I don't have all the answers, and I know that I have said this a lot of different times in a lot of different contexts to a lot of different people. My aha moment was when I had a student come to me and say, you know, I, I'm scared of you. I'm like, what are you talking about? How could you be scared of me? I don't yell, I don't scream, I don't, I might raise my eyebrow every once in a while, but she was scared of me because I knew all the answers. And that was my moment where I was like, oh no, 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 I don't. I actually don't. And so I think it goes back to being comfortable without giving up your willingness to learn together. And it doesn't necessarily have to be that, okay, to Shane's point, whatever it is that you want to learn, we'll learn that necessarily, but allowing students to choose their pathway, maybe with some constraints, because
Mhm.
in the real world of work, we do have constraints. We have clients, we have to produce certain work, but allowing that pathway to unfold and being willing as the teacher to, I hate I hate the guide on the side kind of label, but saying I'm going to learn with you in this process, and we can explore together. And as we explore together, I can scaffold and I can do the formative assessments to see what you need to help support you in that process. And I think that there's such just a, a misunderstanding, and I'm trying to think of a dis word that would go with it. Tim, you can help me out there, but just this misunderstanding of what that means and what that entails, and how to do that process. And so therefore everybody is stuck in the system that we have currently, and they're in some cases unwilling to buck the system.
Yeah, and Dana, I don't know that I have a dis word for you there for misunderstanding, but we did get 8 different dis words out tonight, which is pretty good, right? By my count on my notes. And I'm going to add one last one, which I think will be a somewhat disagreeable statement for a lot of our listeners, but I think it's true. And that is that for the distant students who engage us in discourse about the way our teaching seems disingenuous, those are the 3 initial words, right? I think, unfortunately, a lot of our teachers and a lot of the system responds with a dis word, and that's discipline,
Mm.
right? There's a sense that you're doing it wrong if you're curious. You're doing it wrong if you actually want to engage me in conversation about something that wasn't in my lesson plan. You're doing it wrong. You're making things more difficult for me. And I think of all the kids over the course of my career that I know have been disciplined because they were disagreeable students. And I would challenge us all, as you're reflecting on this conversation this evening, to think about the stories that you heard here about students who are being disagreeable in part because they can see through some of what we're doing and they're actually ready for the adult world more so than we're willing to admit. Because one of the most important, and I'm just going to say it, one of the most important skills you can have in the adult world is the willingness to call bullshit. Uh,
More than ever. More
Here,
than
when
ever.
you
here.
see it more than ever, right?
Yes.
Because Shane's not wrong and Lisa's not wrong. So much of what we're doing in education now is marketing pushes and trying to get on with the latest thing, right? The flavor of the moment. And I've always appreciated those faculty members who are willing to stand up and call, if not bullshit, literally, at least what a nice euphemism for it as a way of saying, seriously, you're going to try to pull this one over on us now? So I think we've unearthed a lot of interesting stuff. I want to thank Shane and Lisa for joining us tonight. And I'm going to shut up and just see if our guests and then Dana have one last word to offer, or a couple of phrases if you need to.
I wanted to think of a word for this. So this is maybe a dis word. So this is an invitation. But one thing I was thinking in preparation is often like whose learning is invisible to the current system? Because that's kind of something I always think about is the person that's just compliantly going through the day, and then you know all of the hobbies or things are just is artistically talented. And so how do like what's the word to fight that? What's the thing we're fighting against, or the discourse that we need to have to make the invisible that's happening legible or legitimate?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if there's a word for that, but that was something I was thinking of trying to come up with a dis word for.
So Shane, I'll say that when you said invisible, it made me think of disappear.
Mm-hmm.
And
Okay.
as we, as we're now, depending on where you are in the country, a month into school or a week and a half into school starting, make sure that your students don't disappear.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, you know, make a determination of what can disappear from what you have been doing so that you can give your students more of a voice and more opportunities to have that discourse, and shorten the distance between being in school and being in the real world.
Love it.
I love that. And I mean, I think the guidance that I've always had in whatever work that I was doing, and I did a lot of work with um, communities that felt like they had been disappeared,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, is to figure out whose voice you're not hearing
Mhm.
and try to find that voice. And I think particularly, Dana, to your point, like right now in the school year is the time where you still have a chance to do that, and to engage those kids. And how do we engage those kids so that they do feel, so they don't feel discouraged, so they don't feel
Yep.
like they've disappeared from the experience.
And we got another dis word in, discouraged. Well, thanks to both of you for joining us tonight and helping us end on a happy note. And I'll just close by saying, if you disagree with anything that was said here tonight, you're welcome to do so on our YouTube channel where we post this video and engage us asynchronously. We'd be happy to continue the disagreeable conversation in that space as well. Thanks, everyone.